Banks and building societies are slowly disappearing from high streets all over the world. Gibraltar isn't immune. Barclays, Lloyds, and most recently, Jyske Bank announced it's selling its Gibraltar branch. Where does that leave the customer?
Yes, I think it's rather limited, and it's also a bit worrying.
I personally thought because of the amount of properties being put up, there's going to be a lot more people asking for mortgages and stuff like that.
I don't know why we don't have more banks in Gibraltar.
Missing more retail banking, definitely.
There's only the local bank, and there's also the NatWest.
That's a hell of a concern. I'm very concerned that if Jyske goes, we've only got 2 banks.
We're only going to be left with Gibraltar International and NatWest as retail bankers for the average person out in the street like myself.
Minister Isola, thanks for your time. Should people in Gibraltar be concerned about the fact that we've had, for a number of years now, fewer and fewer banks on the rock?
I think it needs to be put into context. There was a Which survey last year, December of 2018, which confirmed that in the last 3 years in the United Kingdom alone, some 2,900 branches had closed. That leaves many towns and villages without a bank in them at all, zero. I think there is a commercial reality. Banks are commercial entities. They're there to make money. And if they see that they can come to Gibraltar and make good money in a space, retail banking, where most of the other banks are moving out of, then that's one heck of a commercial challenge. So would I like to see more banks? Yes, but I think we need to be realistic in these aspirations as to put them into the context of where international banking is today, where we are being told that in the last 3 years, 2,100 banks in the UK alone, branches have shut. In the 30 years up until 2018, over, I think it's 14,000 branches have shut. That is the direction of travel. And they estimate that in 2019, that's going to accelerate. So that's the reality. I think it would be not accepting the reality to say that we should have 5 more banks. Well, I'd love to have 5 more banks, but I think we need to be realistic. And so what we are doing as a government is, like we always have been doing, is engaging with challenger banks and other banks in the United Kingdom to explore any possible interest in opening a branch in Gibraltar. Obviously, with Brexit, there is continued access to the UK market, so UK banks would still be able to come to Gibraltar and open a branch in the way that you currently can do within the European Union. UK will carry on doing that. So we will continue to have these discussions, as we have been doing, in the hope that we can speak to a firm that would be interested in that opportunity.
Are you confident that young Gibraltarians who will be opening bank accounts in the coming months and years for the first time will be able to do so with at either the Gibraltar International Bank or NatWest? Is there no danger of those banks having too many customers and not being able to take on any more?
I think you'll see that both those banks, both NatWest and the GIB, have significantly invested in recent years in either setting themselves up and gearing themselves up even further, or investing in their existing premises here in Gibraltar, like NatWest have done. I think they both appreciate and realise and understand that is going to be more business, and I think they're both open to that business. So I'm not aware of any difficulty or issue with people being able to open accounts. Jyske, we need to wait and see how their discussions with prospective purchasers go before we call judgment on that. So I think that's still a work in progress.
There are a lot of properties being built at the moment, affordable homes in the pipeline for the government, but even before then, a lot of private projects, people will be looking for mortgages. Is there any risk that the current offerings in Gibraltar between NatWest, GIB and perhaps Leeds as a building society, that they won't be able to cover the amount of mortgages needed?
Well, I think you need to bear in mind that Jyske are going to continue offering mortgages, and indeed they are, for the next government housing scheme as they have done in the past. So there is no change to the mortgage market. So until the end of next year, it's business as usual. So all these homes, there will be no impact or no effect. And I fully expect that whoever they conclude their discussions with will continue with that practice. So I don't see any issue. And if there is an issue that does arise at some stage in the future, then I'm absolutely certain that government will deal with it to ensure that there are alternatives and mortgages are available.
Do you see a growing role for the Gibraltar International Bank because of the way that the market is moving?
I think that's our safeguard, isn't it? we know that whatever happens, Gibraltar National Bank will never go anywhere. It'll always be here to service local businesses and local people. And I think that is a safeguard that not many small territories have. And I can tell you that I've had discussions with representatives from other small territories inquiring as to how we did Gibraltar International Bank, the possibilities of us assisting them in the issue of these services, perhaps even by opening branches there. So I can tell you that other jurisdictions have looked at what we've done very closely and very carefully. And
would you consider that, if I can ask?
No, we wouldn't, because ultimately we will be putting Gibraltar taxpayers' capital at risk in commercial businesses outside Gibraltar. That's not what GIB was set up to do. But we're certainly happy to help and support other people in doing what they want to do in their own territories, because this is a very common problem. This is not a Gibraltar problem. This is a problem in every small territory, and some which are not so small, in terms of having retail banking available to their people. And I think we are probably the first one to have taken the step that we have to ensure that we will always have banking provision in Gibraltar, whatever happens in the future.
Does that mean that the government will always be at least a majority shareholder in the GIB, or would you like to attract private investment into it?
It's something that we've talked about from the word go, and there is always a possibility of joint venturing with another partner within the bank. Whether that's another bank or a group of individuals, is something that we are open to discussion. We always have been. We've actually engaged with discussion with certain people who wanted to do it, and we've pulled back for the simple reason that we want the bank to get into profit, to begin to crystallize some of that investment that we've seen, which we think they are now there. And then at the appropriate time, when we've got through the opening process, we're now a couple of years in, to be able to have these sorts of discussions. So the first priority was get open, get going, see how everything works, see what issues we have, see the numbers. Do we need more people? Do we need less people? How are the things going? And I think the evidence is that they will require more people, which I think they're dealing with themselves, as they should. I think it's going remarkably well.
The Gibraltar International Bank is wholly owned by the government. It's regulated by the Financial Services Commission, which is funded by the government, or at least partly funded. Is there a conflict of interest that needs to be managed?
Well, I think on the issue of funding, it's important to point out that the Financial Services Commission is independent of government. It receives its revenue from its licensees, and in a package that we agreed, I think 3 or 4 years ago with government, we agreed to give a small subvention to support that strategic objectives which they were set out. Is there any conflict? The biggest conflict, if there was one, was in terms of the management of the bank. And when we announced in 2013 that we were going to open the bank, we made it absolutely clear that there would be no relationship whatsoever between the government and the bank in terms of its executive operation. And so we put completely independent people in terms of the executive, and they run it professionally and commercially, as you would expect. And we don't have any government appointees on the board.
Any need for a financial ombudsman?
There will be a financial ombudsman appointed very shortly. We've committed to doing that, and we're now in the last throes of both the regulations that we need and the appointment of the individual. So I think watch this space.
What's the most important thing that you'd like people to remember from this interview?
I think that banking is changing. There is an enormous shift away from high street banking, branches, to online banking, where you can do all the things that you could do on a branch online. And that is a direction of travel. I mean, people will not know that we've had 3 banking licenses issued in Gibraltar in the last 3 years, one of which is Gibraltar National Bank. The other 2 are very much more boutique or niche-focused banks. Moneycorp and GROC, both of which Moneycorp people will be more familiar with in terms of the operation that they have. GROC is not yet fully launched. Its license in principle will be coming online very, very shortly. There are another number of banking applications which will be coming through the regulator who I've met. So there is movement, but the movement is in a very different space. Banking is changing. And it's not coincidence that 2,100 branches have shut in the UK. It's because there is this shift to online banking. That works for some, but not for all. And so I think the need to have a branch will be far less in the future than it is now. And we all bank on our telephones and on our terminals. I can't think the last time I walked into my own bank. you don't need to, because you can do everything online. So I think the direction of travel is very, very different to where we've come from. And so I don't think people need to worry at the fact that there are going to be less high street banks. There will be high street banks like GIB and NatWest, but there will be a lot more availability cross-border, online, on your phones, and I think that is the way that the market is going, and nobody's going to stop that.
Danny, thanks for your time. We're talking about banking. What are your initial thoughts on the subject?
Well, it's a tough environment, and of course we've seen that through a process of consolidation and rationalisation within the banking sector, that there have been banks that have left Gibraltar. I think this is not something that is now. This is something that goes back quite a number of years. I mean, you may recall in 1998-1999 that the then GSD government published an advert which was in the form of a pyramid, and it basically said, if you have the right foundations, the building blocks will follow, something to that effect. And you had all the building blocks with the names of banks that we had there. If you actually look at that pyramid today, I can bet you anything that about half of those banks have left. So it's a process that commenced over 20 years ago, that has been accelerated, I think, over recent years for a number of reasons. Economic within the banking sector, but also I think that in the last 2 years, Brexit also had an impact. And really the issue here is, how does Gibraltar react, and what do we do about it?
And how well do you think Gibraltar has reacted to that?
I think that we can do more. I think in the first place, Gibraltar's got to protect its fiscal regime. Gibraltar has benefit from having a reasonable fiscal regime. And we need to protect that. And we protect that by making sure that we don't overspend in other areas, that our public debt doesn't get too large, so that it then doesn't have a knock-on effect on increases in taxes, for example. We need to also make sure that regulation-wise, in terms of dealing with employees and registering of employees and all that type of stuff, that is business friendly. That not only applies to the banking sector, it applies to businesses generally. And I think also the regulator, the Financial Services Commission, has an important role to play. You know, I've been very critical about the Financial Services Commission in terms of its enforcement regime. I think that over the last 2 or 3 years, it's really become less business friendly, if I can put it that. And we really need to get back on track there. Because if you have a regulator that potentially is not business friendly, that places obstacles rather than trying to be reasonable in solving problems and working with business, then that will and does create a problem.
But it's a tricky balance for the FSC, isn't it? Because you're talking about them being business friendly, but first and foremost, they need to look after the customer.
Oh, absolutely. Being a regulator is not an easy job. But I think that the balance, and it is about balance, you've rightly identified the correct word, it is about balance. The balance over recent years has fallen on the wrong side of that line. And I think that we need to address it. We just can't hide our heads in the sand. This is an issue, and it's an issue that needs to be tackled, and it's an issue that needs to be addressed. And I'm sure that it can be addressed, but really we've got to bear that in mind as well in this debate.
Most people who we've spoken to say that they would like more retail banks in Gibraltar, but do you think that that's a realistic prospect?
Retail banking is difficult because of the market. It's a very small market. So I think it is difficult. With banking generally, because I mean you can't just sort of focus on retail banking. Banking as a sector has traditionally been important, even though, as I say, there's been a contraction of the banking sector going back 20 years in Gibraltar. We've got to be looking at new opportunities in the sector. So, for example, banks in the payment services sector. I've been involved recently in looking at potential acquisition of banks that might be able to do cryptocurrency business elsewhere in the European Union. They're looking at an entity within the European Union. Well, that again is something that we need to be looking at very closely if we're really going to be able to expand and exploit the cryptocurrency side of services in Gibraltar. So those are the type of areas. There are other areas. I mean, look, in 2006, Roy Clinton and myself, together with Marcus Killick, we set up a working group in order to explore introducing Islamic finance legislation in Gibraltar. And one of the products of that could have been the setting up of an Islamic finance bank. There are international banks that are structured on along the lines of Islamic principles that make it attractive for people that are Muslims that want to essentially invest their money in businesses that are conducted in accordance with that particular faith. It never came to anything. The GSD was in power at the time, and it was unfortunate it never came to anything. But I think that we've got to be imaginative. We've got to be going out there. We've got to be looking for opportunities. And if we do that, and if we maintain our agility, and as I say, Gibraltar is a business-friendly place to do business, then I think that we will be okay.
Lawrence, thanks a lot for your time. We're reflecting upon a global trend which sees more and more automation, people using online banking more, and there being fewer and fewer banks on the high street. How does the Gibraltar International Bank fit into that global picture?
Well, it is true to say that the banks have gone more digital now than before, and it is a trend. It's part of everyday life, I would say now. And when we opened the bank, we in fact promoted the digital aspects of it. We have quite a number of ATMs in which you can also deposit monies available for clients. And it is true to say that the majority of the community are now working and dealing with their banking arrangements via online services provided by the bank. That is in fact true. So yes, you would see less and less retail banks in the high streets, and that is the case everywhere, in the UK, in Spain, wherever you go. So there is a reliance on the digital side of banking, yes, absolutely.
Reflecting upon this global trend, I mean, the GIB was actually born out of Barclays deciding to close its branch in Gibraltar.
Well, yes, the bank came about because Barclays announced that it was shutting down after being here more than 100 years. And it's true to say that banks generally after the 2008 financial crisis retrenched back to their home countries. There's a way of avoiding exposures in third-party countries which they might not be at ease with, and obviously it has an impact. But this is not particular to Gibraltar. We know that this is happening, for example, in the Falkland Islands. It's happening in St. Helena, which is another British territory, overseas British territory, and it is something which small jurisdictions have to cope with. And I think the government was right in setting up a bank in Gibraltar, a local bank, because these decisions which are taken elsewhere, in boardrooms, in high places, the strategies that they put forward, and in particular in the digital age that we live in, do not usually include the small jurisdictions. They're avoiding exposures where they don't need to have it. And Gibraltar is a small place, it's a small jurisdiction, 30,000 people, and that might not enter into the plans of the large credit institutions, which previously have been in Gibraltar. So we have managed to, I think, promote ourselves well. The bank is doing extremely well in its first 3.5, close to 4 years now opened. We have something in the region of 25,000 clients. Our loan book, there's about 6,000 loans that we have given to the value of about 230 million. And we can see that more and more businesses are coming our way now, so we are the main bankers. And like I said, it's all looking extremely well for us. And yes, coming back to your point earlier on the digital aspects of it, I have to say that Gibraltar is still very cash-centric, so we have a lot of movement in cash, and last year we moved in the region of about £230 million of cash in and out from the bank, which is a huge amount for a small community. So we are trying to promote the digital area, the digital product more and more, but the public has to engage with us and want to also do their banking online.
If we think about the recent news of Jyske Bank looking to sell its local branch, Barclays and Lloyds having closed their doors to customers before that, people might be concerned about the overall capacity in Gibraltar. So can the GIB take on more customers and open more current accounts?
Well, the bank can at the moment increase its volume of accounts considerably. There is no issue on that front. Regarding the lending, obviously the less banks that are available in Gibraltar, it means that there are fewer credit institutions to lend out the money to potential borrowers for purchase of property, etc. So it is of concern, obviously, that the concentration risk in that respect might necessarily go up because there are fewer institutions lending. We're not there yet, but I think it's something we have to keep a close eye on, because it could become a problem if the other banks also exit the marketplace. In that case, we would have obviously to take a policy decision whether to increase our concentration risk, and obviously we would consult the regulator as well on that particular point.
You mentioned the fact that the government took the decision to open the Gibraltar International Bank some years back. But you're set up to operate on commercial terms. Despite that, you are prepared to take on more concentration risk than other commercial lenders are. You have gone beyond what other commercial banks would deem the right amount of risk.
Well, the risk is very much in the eyes of the beholder, yeah? And each bank will take the risk profile to wherever it thinks that it's necessary. We've been comfortable in having a 50% concentration risk exposure because we know the marketplace, we know Gibraltar, the regulator is fully aware of our position. What I'm saying is that if there is a need to increase that concentration risk exposure, then obviously there are other considerations to take into account, and we would need to sit down obviously and discuss that with the board of directors, and like I said before, consult also the regulator. I hope it doesn't happen, and equally I wish that other banks will come into the marketplace, because that is, I think, what we all want.
Mm-hmm. I mean, in particular, as a client perhaps of the GIB, or potential client who might be watching this, what would you say to them if they had fears that the lack of competition could lead to the GIB, or indeed NatWest, taking advantage of the client?
No, I mean, if we are talking on the pricing front, the bank has its standard tariff, which has not changed, and we would not evidently try to take advantage of market conditions simply because we might be one of the 2 or 3 lenders in Gibraltar. I think we have to have a product which is in line with the market, a product which the client finds acceptable, and the bank also, and that's the way we would operate.
In recent months, you introduced a new core banking platform and invested significantly in it. How well do you think it's performing?
Yes, we introduced the upgraded version of the platform last October. It was quite a complex exercise which we had been working on for 18 months. It went very well, but needless to say, like every change in computer systems and programs, etc., there are some issues which remain after the migration and after the upgrade, which for 2 or 3 weeks after, we were heavily involved in trying to resolve. These were all of a technical nature, and we tried obviously not to impact the client and keep it well under control. I can say now that over the past 2 or 3 months, it's working perfectly well, and I think clients are now taking advantage of an enhanced online program, which is fantastic. I get also the views of some of my friends, etc., that say that the telephone application is certainly an upgrade to the previous one that we had. So, I would tend to think that, the community is much better off now with the digital platforms that we offered them.